welcome to the Sunday show. We are neither of the people that you just saw in that introduction, and it's just it's just getting louder and louder. Oh my glob! Are you getting the crazy feedback, or is that just me? No, it was just me.
Might just be you.
I got it figured out. It's cool. We're off to a rolling start so far. Things are going phenomenally. You got two new hosts happening. One of us already had a tech issue. It's going to be a great show. And we've got 2 whole hours to entertain you by taking questions and comments from you. If you are a theist person, if you are a person who believes that gods or magic or spirits or whatever are real, or if you have any of the other bizarrely controversial opinions that we take on this show all the time, now is your chance to call in and try to convert us, to try to change our minds, to have an honest conversation, because we're honestly here to listen. We're here to talk to you. We're here to take your questions, comments, and concerns, and we're here to answer your whatever challenge you give to us. And after I don't know how many years this show's been on, haven't been convinced yet. So maybe you'll be the one. But with that, hi, I'm Forrest, and I'm joined today by Paul. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent. Both you and I learned at the relatively last minute that we were doing this, so what an exciting rush for a Sunday afternoon.
Yep.
Great news.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. I'm so stoked. It was supposed to be, I got a call last weekend or something, just like, hey, can you fill in here? And then it was me and Matt, and then it was me and Jimmy, and then it was me and Arden, and now it's me and you, and it is what it is. It's all good. I like it.
Absolutely.
This situation is working out just fine. Nothing is wrong. Everything's okay.
Well,
no one's hurt.
This is the Holy Spirit guiding so that I can be here, so that I can be converted today.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
In all honesty, though, I think you and I have only ever done one other show together, and I've been wanting to work with you ever since. So I'm excited about that. Seriously, I'm very stoked.
And a huge fan of yours as well. So can't wait
thank you.
to hang with you for a couple hours, and we can outsmart each other. We'll see how that goes.
Right. We've got a couple people on the line already that I'm going to start jumping into. But before I get there, just quickly before I forget, I just want to remind everybody that this channel takes memberships. You can become a channel member, and you get little emojis you can use in the chats if you have that going on. I'm sure there's other benefits. I don't know what they are. There's also a Patreon that goes along with this channel. So if you want to help support us and help us make great content, check out our Patreon. It'd be really, really cool for you to do that. And also always go and look at the hosts as well, because we have guest hosts all the time. We try to give them shout outs as to go to their platforms. Each of the main hosts also have their own platform. So if you want to learn more about us, if you want to find out how to support us, if you want to find new cool ways to help these poor, unfortunate atheist souls get further ahead in their lives, those are all ways that you can do that. And it's a really, really cool thing for you to do. So I will forget that if I don't say it right now. So now that's out of the way. We're going to jump right in with Adam from the UK. Pronouns are he, him. Is a theist who wants to talk about the digital physics argument for God. I've got a lot of questions about what that is. Adam, you're on the line. How are you doing?
Hello, Forrest and Paul.
Hello there.
Can you? Yeah, pardon me.
I was going to say, tell us what you're talking about, because I looked up digital physics, and I can't imagine that it's the same thing that you're discussing here, but maybe it is. So let's hear it.
Yeah, I wondered if you wanted to discuss this relatively recent argument for the existence of God, or at the very least, a mind that's responsible for the structure of the universe. It's called the digital physics argument, and it's about 10 years old. It's written by Aron Ra, and it was presented, kind of popularized by Mike Jones with Inspiring Philosophy.
Okay. And what exactly is the argument? Because I've heard 1,000 different arguments that there has to be some sort of mind behind the universe, and they all fail. So which one is this? How does this one separate from the rest?
Yeah, pretend we don't know what it is, because we don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, I looked up digital physics, and what I've got here is it's a speculative idea that the universe can be conceived of as a vast digital computation device or as the output of a deterministic or probabilistic computer program. That's what I found online. Is that the argument you're talking about? Is that we're all in a simulation, or what?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description.
So
I mean,
are you arguing that the universe is a simulation in a computer, or that it is similar or analogous to one, or like what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, I'd say that it is a simulation.
Okay, and how could we possibly disprove that?
How could we disprove it? Well, we would have had the opportunity to disprove it if the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen conjecture had held up, which was disproven in 1964.
How would that have disproven that we're living in a simulation?
Well, because it entails the idea of localistic effects, and as well as
which could very easily be programmed into a computer, right? You can make
exactly.
a computer program. Yeah. So how would that have disproven that we're in a simulation? If that could be part of the simulation?
Well, because if basically a simulation is a program, and if you have what you have with the program is it entails non-localistic effects. So, namely, the conservation of information.
So, what if I made a program that runs with localistic effects as well? What if I had like Skyrim, and the physics are just slightly different in this zone than they are in that zone? And if I just go into this new area, things behave slightly differently because that's how I programmed it.
It's because the scenario that you're describing actually hides a more fundamental fact, is that if you're moving from one part of the program, so one part of the space of the game, into another region, which you're saying is different, the very possibility of that movement is underpinned by a common program. So the same program has to actually distribute over both. Yeah.
Sure. And so what I'm saying is that thing that you're talking about, this non-local, all these things. Why not just say that we made the program to look that way or to run that way, and that there's a deeper underlying program that runs it that way?
Excuse me. I think the deeper underlying program is what's being pointed at by the argument.
As far as you can tell, okay, sure, but like there could be a program under it. Like that's the thing with this argument, is that if you're gonna say we're in a video game, that this is all the simulation, then you can easily say anything that we show whatsoever is part of that simulation. And if I disprove the simulation, that part of me disproving it was part of the simulation too. And if I wake up from the simulation and I'm now escaped from the simulation, no, you're not. You're in level 2 now of the simulation. The point is, what you're describing here is what we call an unfalsifiable claim. It's the same thing as saying, what if you're a brain in a jar that's being fed chemicals to make you think this is the world around you? It's the same thing as saying, what if you actually just started existing 5 minutes ago and all the memories that you have of the rest of your life are actually pre-programmed in? It's the same thing as saying, what if you're in a computer game? It's all of this same shit. What we know for sure is that we are experiencing reality. I think, therefore I am. We know we exist because we have thoughts and we have these experiences. But as far as the nature of reality, the underlying fabric of it, you have to be able to falsify what you're saying for it to be worth thinking about. And if there's no possible way for you to prove what you're saying is wrong, then it's not a valid argument for anything. Because I can very easily, you can say, oh, well, this is God. God's doing this thing. And I can very easily say, no, it's not. It's Rick Sanchez. And we're all in the car battery. You know, it's the exact same argument. And it means the exact same nothing. I'm sorry, Paul. I think you had something to say as well. I cut you off.
Well, that's all right. I was actually going to ask. So if you subscribe to this digital physics model, are you also subscribing then to a deterministic model of the universe?
No.
Why? What? Okay. What? You started by saying that the universe was a sufficiently deterministic program. That's how you started this.
I didn't.
And I happen to be a determinist.
No, I read off the here. I'll open it back up again.
Oh, you read
this,
off. Okay.
This thing that says that the output is deterministic or probabilistic computer programming, and you said that that's a good summary, Adam. You said that that's a good summary of what it is. So I said it was deterministic,
Right.
and you said yeah, totally. So, but
So,
even then, that begs the question: if it's all programmed in, how is it not determined?
Right, like I guess that's where I was going. Is like software by definition is deterministic. You said it out in the wild. I was a developer for a long time, even in the video game industry, and that's how all this works. And like you set it up and you let it go, and so I cannot. How is that? How is that? Even if we said, oh yeah, we're in a simulation, therefore God. Like I don't get it. I don't know where the ... is.
Okay, there's a few things that I have to respond to. So, I mean, the first thing about determinism. So since I agreed to that description, I was basically thinking that this wasn't going to go in the direction of thinking about how decisions are made by conscious beings. So, for the purpose of the argument, for the purpose of the argument. Which, I mean, we've not gone through the premises, but for the purpose of the argument itself, I'm happy to agree to determinism, but my actual view is not deterministic. But the other points that you said were that a theory has to be falsifiable, and the other. So was the first thing is that you said that it's got to be falsifiable. You also said. It's sort of like saying, I think, therefore I am. Basically, I don't agree that a theory that purports to explain everything has to be falsifiable in the strict sense that you're saying. So a theory has to be falsifiable at the level of observation, so that there has to be the possibility that the theory is going to be disproven by instrumental measurement.
The other thing Forrest was getting at, though, on the flip side of falsifiability is unique predictions. If you can make unique future predictions of future data, that's what he was getting at, although I'm not in those words. So how does this digital model get us to unique future predictions of future data?
Okay, well, I mean, I can respond to that in a bit, but basically, where I was headed was when. So, I mean, yeah, like you mentioned, I think therefore I am, and that's obviously not falsifiable. But if you're acknowledging that it's true, then you're also acknowledging that something unfalsifiable can be true. The sense in which falsifiability matters perfectly applies to the simulation hypothesis, or it's actually very closely related to quantum information theory, which is where this is all coming from. What I'm saying is,
you just said the words. You're summarizing. Pardon me, I'm paraphrasing what you said here, but you said basically your point was that we have to accept that something unfalsifiable can be true. Did I hear you say that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Just really quickly, can you explain what falsifiability means so we're all on the same page?
In terms of empirical science, it means that there's a possibility of a measurement that would contradict the theory.
Not really a possibility of one, just like that there is a way to do that. Like so let me explain this way, because it's very easy to get these words confused, right? Evolution is what I study. It's falsifiable, which means that if this thing happens, then evolution isn't true. If we find fossils that are in the wrong place in the fossil record, if we find DNA that just spontaneously comes out of nothing and has totally new traits that we can't trace back, that would be a way to say, okay, now evolution, probably isn't. If we see, like creationists like to say, a dog give birth to a duck, now we have, a pretty big problem with evolution, right? If those things happen, then evolution isn't true. That's falsifiability. What would have to happen for us to say that evolution isn't true? What would prove evolution false? It doesn't mean those things are possible. It doesn't mean those things are real. It doesn't mean those things are out there anywhere. It just means we know what it would take to prove this wrong. So when you say an unfalsifiable thing could be true, evolution is falsifiable, but it has yet to be falsified, right? There are ways that it could potentially, theoretically, hypothetically be proven wrong, and we can calculate that. We know what that is. That doesn't mean that they're possible, likely, any of that. It just, we know what it would take to prove this wrong. That's what falsifiability means, right? So when you say an unfalsifiable thing could be true, what I think you're saying, if I give you the benefit of the doubt, what I'm taking that is something can be true even if we can't find a way to falsify it. But what it sounds a lot more like you're saying is we don't actually need to worry about the logical responsibility of falsifiability. We can just decide that we want to believe this thing. And I want to make it very clear that that's not acceptable. Like, are we on the same page with that?
Not really. I'm sorry. I didn't mean the second thing that you said. I meant that falsifiability is a legitimate criteria for a theory, so long as it applies to experimental data.
No.
So what we instrumentally.
No. There's no but there. It is a necessary criteria for believing a thing. Period. It is a necessary criteria for something to be a scientific idea, for something to be something that you should actually stake your worldview on. You need to be able to say, well, at least I can test it a little bit. I can't, I can't go out and test the Big Bang right now from here in my office, but I know what kind of things would make it not make sense. And I don't see any of those things. So at least I have that going for me, right? With what you're talking about here, you don't have that. There's not a single thing that I could do to prove you wrong, because every single thing I offer you, you could just say, well, that's part of the simulation too. And you came up with some idea that, well, this thing that Einstein tested, that would have disproven the simulation. Like, no, as Paul explained, you can factor that in. You can easily code for that. So, like, there's not a single thing you can't run in a simulation, especially if you're in the simulation and the rules of the simulation are the only rules you can possibly imagine. Like, you have an unfalsifiable claim. That means you don't need to, like, do the hard work of thinking with it. And that's a problem.
So there's a couple of things I kind of need to I kind of need to clarify that the position that I'm coming from, because you're going on about stuff that I don't think. So the problem is that when I say that something can be unfalsifiable and true, this basically pertains to certain levels of formal systems. Namely, it's what ultimately would be demanded of a theory of everything. What you would end up with is something that there's no measurable contradiction to, or no measurable case in which the theory of everything would be false, because a theory of everything basically has two criteria, which are the same criteria as the scientific method, which is distinguishability and replicability. And for it to be replicable, it has to be true everywhere. And so there would be no condition under which it would be proven false. So when the idea of falsifiability, you
didn't follow what Forrest said.
You didn't. I'm sorry. I know.
You didn't follow what Forrest said. A theory of everything absolutely would be very falsifiable, because if you found one thing that the theory of everything didn't explain, it is no longer a theory of everything. So the fact that what you're trying to say is if we successfully found this theory of everything, nothing would contradict it, but something potentially could contradict it. There's a logical possibility of something that would contradict even the best theory of everything. Yes. The fact that we found a theory that explains everything doesn't negate our ability to imagine a thing that would contradict it. So with your theory, you're trying to say, look, I am willing to accept something without falsification criteria. And if that's the way you want to live your life, awesome. Like great, you can do that. The trouble is, if you want to go convince someone else that my non-falsifiable idea is better than your non-falsifiable idea, you're just in the realm of preference and choice, right? You're into the one that, well, I like this one better because it suits me. or
Right.
it feeds my intuition or something. And what we're hoping you were going to call up with this argument for God, meaning this argument is more than just describing a thing that I prefer. It's a thing that you should believe along with me. And I
Right.
think that's the part you're skipping. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think you summarized it really well, because like that's the thing. Like, you can say an unfalsifiable thing can possibly be true. Sure, let's say hypothetically there's a thing out there that's unfalsifiable and it is true, magical. That doesn't mean there's a good reason to believe it. Like, if it's not falsifiable, there's no good reason to believe it. That's what we're coming from. And if we did have a grand theory of every single thing in the universe, that would still be falsifiable, because we could say, if I find a planet that orbits a star in a perfect triangle, then my theory doesn't work. It doesn't matter if it encompasses everything. That's clearly a new thing that shouldn't happen, so it doesn't work. Doesn't mean that it's likely, doesn't mean that it's possible. It means if this happens, this theory doesn't work, no matter how big or vast it is. Do you understand where we're coming from now?
No, I understand where you're coming from. I understood before as well. But what I think is happening is a distinction is being missed, which is that there's an experimental level of unfalsifiability, which is the one that we agree on, that you're saying is a criteria for a theory of everything. And I agree that it's a criteria for that theory. But what I'm trying to say is, when you talked about unfalsifiability before, when you mentioned "I think, therefore I am," this is the formal. This is the kind of unfalsifiability that a formal theory has, which is not it's not pertainable to instrumental science. So, for example, I mean, the strongest example is just logic itself. You can't falsify logic, because logic is what does the falsifying. So the rules, if you're falsifying something, when you expose something to be falsifiable or unfalsifiable, in either those two situations, you're using a set of rules, which is logic, which themselves are immune to falsification. So
they absolutely know. If we found that A was not equal to A,
then it would be
in our universe, then we would falsify. Then we would falsify the laws of logic. The laws of logic work because, just like a scientific law, they are merely observations for which we have found no exception.
Right.
I disagree. So, if you found in quotation marks, if you found that A was not equal to A, you're just uttering a contradiction, which falls under the definition of being false. And so what you're doing is you're just expressing a paradox, but the paradox is resolved by just reapplying logic. And when you're saying it's observational, it's really not observational, because everything that you observe is either true or false.
I'm going to be honest with you, Adam. We're kind of talking in circles at this point, where like we're just getting into this weird nitty gritty about like the minutia of logic and all these little things. I ate before the show. I'm full. I don't want any word salad. So instead, I'm just going to ask you a completely different question, and we'll see how that goes, because we've been on this call for about 20 minutes now. So I'm going to ask you something completely different, and we're going to see if we can get anywhere with that, and cross our fingers, right? So why do you believe in a God?
Well, I'd say logic.
Cool.
I mean, an example is the argument that I was going to present, but
give us your absolute best argument that shows us that there is a God that we should believe in. What is it?
Well, I'll just present the argument that I was going to present. So, the conclusion is that a mind is responsible for the structure of the universe. So that the universe is a simulation in a mind, and this follows from the universe is a simulation, and that simulations can only exist on a computer and ultimately in a mind.
Cool. Any evidence for absolutely any of that you'd like to present us?
Oh well, I mean, there's lots of evidence that the universe is a simulation.
Like what?
I mean, the fact that as physicists have tried to find a theory of quantum gravity, they've basically converged on the consensus that space-time is emergent. So it's not it's not a fixed array, and that the basically physical particles they're emerging along with it, right? So most of this comes from the quantum entanglement experiments that were done in 1969 and that won the Nobel Prize, which showed that basically information is conserved, that the information of physical states, they're conserved. So if you
just out of curiosity here, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but you're talking about quantum physics and quantum gravity. I'm a biologist. It's a little bit outside of my scope. What I do want to look up, I just found this study in Nature journal, the most prestigious science journal in the world, one of them, showing the rates of religiosity among scientists. Biologists have the lowest rate of belief in God at 5.5%. Hey, and then physicists and astronomers are just slightly higher at 7.5%. 7.5% of physicists believe in a God. So you're saying that our recent understanding of physics is proof that there is a simulation that's running the world, and the simulation is a God that's happening. It's like your belief in God comes from what you believe is proof from physics. Why do you think only 7.5% of actual physicists believe in God if you think physics proves God?
Well, I don't have to explain. Do you think
maybe they understand it a little bit more?
I mean, I don't have to explain what other people think.
No, of course not. I'm just asking you, do you think your understanding of quantum physics is somehow something that these people don't, that 93%, 92.5% of them who understand this stuff and went to college to learn this stuff don't believe you, but you understand quantum physics so well that you know something that 92.5% of physicists don't understand?
I think it's a matter of focus and what you take interest in. Some people have a very keen interest in philosophy, which I do, and I come at physics from the standpoint of philosophy, and that doesn't necessarily.
Do you have any formal training in physics at all?
No, just high school.
Okay, so you are a high school philosopher who is learning a little bit of physics on his own, and you think that you're seeing something here that 92.5% of physicists don't see who went to school to learn physics. Is that what I'm getting?
I mean, if there's something I missed, you have to point it out.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, because I asked your best argument for God, and you said, oh, well, quantum physics has really shown us there has to be a simulation and there has to be a God. Here's these people who actually study quantum physics, who actually know what it is and went to college to learn it, and now are professionals in the field. You learned a little bit in high school, and now you're a philosopher. What are you seeing that the professional physicists aren't seeing, is the question.
Well, I think that a lot of them are seeing it. I mean, there's Edward Fredkin, who wrote a paper on the universe being a computer. There's John Wheeler, who put forward the it from bit theory, that every physical state is a bit or a byte, and that was in 1990.
Do either of those papers end with "therefore God" or include "therefore God" in the summary of the paper?
Any part of that?
Well, that's why I mentioned focus and what you take interest in. Some people can compartmentalize things in their minds, and my interest, like I said, comes from philosophy and things like when I take a look at, say, for example, the Chinese room argument from John Searle. I just look at these physical facts, and I just embed it into what I know about philosophy, and the conclusions follow from there.
Just
so
out
is
of
this
curiosity,
an elaborate?
Adam. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, this sounds like look at the trees, which is what I was raised with in my evangelical days all the time. This is just a very slight variation on look at the tree. If you understood the tree, it would be obvious to you that God made it. And it seems to you're really relying on someone's intuition. You actually said it outright. It's what are you interested in? What's your philosophy? You're just if your intuition tells you that that this needs a God, then you see it, and if your intuition is different, then you don't see it. And we're back to this non-falsifiable. So we're back to two entirely non-falsifiable ideas. Forrest and I are looking for ways that we can pick your idea over our idea. We'd love to, but you haven't presented anything to help us. You're just basically telling us, I like this idea, it resounds with me, and we're saying, well, it doesn't resound with us, so we're left nowhere.
Right. And what gets me is that, like, it's not impossible at all for somebody who isn't an expert in a field to come up with a breakthrough idea. That happens. You know, whenever I talk about, like, you know, what do you know that the physicists don't know? I'm not saying that by getting a physics degree, you are now an authority in all things in the physical world and you know every single thing forever. It's just a whole hell of a lot more likely, right? So, like, I went to school, I earned several degrees in biology. Biology is my job, it's my passion, it's the thing that I learn about every day. It's more likely that I'm going to know a thing about biology than somebody who than a physicist. Somebody who studied physics for as long as I've studied biology might not know the biology shit that I know, and I certainly don't know the physics shit that they know. Does it mean that I would never make a discovery in physics or they would never make a discovery in biology? Of course not. That's very possible, and shit like that's happened before. But it's very, very improbable, right? So, like, when you come here and say, I'm a philosopher and I learned some physics in high school, and these PhD physicists, these master's level physicists, even these bachelor's or associate's level physicists, these people who are actually learning this stuff, they don't see what I see because they're coming at it from the wrong angle. I wonder if you hear how that sounds and just how unlikely that is. Like, for example, Adam, if you were to come down with cancer right now, if you found out, oh my God, body's, you know, I've got some sort of cancer, whatever it is, and you went to a doctor and the doctor said, yeah, well, we need to start you on chemotherapy, radiation, we need to look at surgery options, all these things. But then here's Mike, and Mike's an air conditioning tech. And Mike comes over and says, listen, I've been working on air conditioners for a little while. I learned a little bit about cancer in high school. I think these doctors really just aren't seeing the big picture here. I have a different perspective on it. And what you need to be doing is eating more apples. Apples, it says right there, apples a day keeps the doctor away. And that says it for if you eat the apples, your lungs are going to be free of cancer. You're going to be just fine. How likely are you to believe Mike over the doctors, right? Like, that's what we're coming with here. Is you're giving us some weird new perspective on reality that over 90% of physicists disagree on, and saying, well, you know more than the physicist. Like, how is that likely?
I have to respond to what Paul last said to me. I'm sorry,
Sure.
but
Hope you're responding to both.
When you're saying that I'm basing my belief in God on intuition, I'm sorry, but that you kind of mixed together two things that I wasn't saying. So when I mentioned focus and what you take interest in, that was a response to Forrest's question about why I think the physicists don't believe in God. Right? I wasn't talking about why I think that. Right? I mean, the reason why I think is because of the arguments in favor. But I wasn't saying that I'm intuiting that God exists. I was just making a judgment about why Forrest says that 96% or 95% of physicists don't believe. I'm just using my own experience of what I take interest in to be the explanatory factor in why there's a difference between me and the physicist. That's all I'm saying.
So you literally just saying that they, because of your interest, they don't consider this question? And if they would take time to consider this question, they would come to the same conclusion that you did? That seems to be what you're saying.
Yes, some of them would, I think.
So 97% of physicists, 92% of physicists, the God question is unimportant to them.
I think that when we're forming our beliefs, we're guided by our will and what we're interested in knowing. And if I think that a physicist who takes a very keen interest in philosophy, who also is clarified on what this the simulation hypothesis with physics. I think that they'll put things together and that they will conclude, yeah, I mean, what's responsible for the universe?
You're literally
is likely
saying
a mind.
that you listed a couple papers, and those papers don't insist that the God is a necessary conclusion. So the people who know even this theory the best don't naturally come to that conclusion. No, but I understand. But you're trying to tell us that we should naturally come to this conclusion based on this world being a thing. So you're mixing multiple ingredients now. We need to not only accept this new theory of physics, but then bring in other philosophies that are also unestablished. Like you're layering on the improbabilities. The Occam's razor here doesn't seem to fit. Anyway, I don't know, Forrest, have we talked around this one enough?
Yeah, it's been about 30 minutes, and that was about as long as I wanted to give it. We've been talking past each other for a little while, and Adam, I would like to know if you have anything to say about the thing that I said as well, because I gave you a whole thing, and you jumped back over to Paul, which is fine. Paul made a good point, and I'm glad you addressed it. But just, would you rather trust a doctor with your medical health, or would you rather trust an air conditioning tech who learned some medical stuff in high school and thinks that the doctors just aren't seeing things the way that he's seeing things? Which do you think is the most likely way to get good medical advice?
Well, you're confusing what we should be getting advice on, right? So in your analogy...
It's an analogy. I'm giving an analogous situation. It's a different thing. In your situation, you're talking about advice on God. In my situation, I'm talking about advice on, say, cancer. So where should you get your advice on cancer? Is it from a guy who learned some stuff in high school and then went to a completely different career? Or is it from a doctor?
If we're asking questions about physics, we should ask physicists. If we're asking questions about philosophy, we should ask philosophers.
Right.
If we're asking questions about medical stuff, we should ask doctors.
So here we are now with you giving us a lecture on physics and why it points to God. And I don't understand why you don't see that as incredibly arrogant.
I mean, I don't have an opinion on whether or not it's arrogant. I mean, I hope I'm not coming across as arrogant.
I figured as a philosopher, you have an opinion on everything.
A quick search on how many philosophers believe in God. It seems to be 14%.
There you go.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you're the rare one. You're the only philosopher in the whole wide world who gets physics super well and philosophy super well. And now here you are proving us all that God's real because a simulation is real that you can't prove isn't real. Like, you don't see a problem with any of this at all?
I mean, thank you. I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but I mean, if I'm in the minority, then I'm discussing this with you so that I'm no longer in the minority.
Right. No,
hoping to be
being in the minority doesn't mean that you're necessarily incorrect. I need you to understand here. Have you had any formal training in philosophy either? Did you go to college for philosophy?
No.
What's your highest level of education?
I have a doctorate in molecular biology.
Microbiology. Okay.
Molecular biology.
Molecular biology. And you're a philosopher who thinks he knows physics, is what you're telling me.
Well, I mean, I hope I'm presenting the physics as a physicist would present it. And that's what I hope, so that the argument can receive the best support that it can get.
What's killing me here is if you actually have a PhD, which man, you're sounding more and more like a troll, but like, if you actually had one, like, I feel like they would have taught you to avoid this kind of thing, because like all my grad school was like how not to talk outside of your bubble, and like very weird that you're not getting that. Anyway, we're gonna go and move on there. Yeah, go ahead, bud, Paul.
But Adam, next time Forrest is on this show, you two could have had a half-hour conversation about biology that would have been amazing.
It would have been dope.
So the
shit of it is, I study evolution, I study bioanthropology, I study biomedical science. I'm not a microbiologist. So even though I have a background in that, I wouldn't be talking about details about microbiology, because even though that's in the biological field, it's a little outside of my scope. So I wouldn't put myself in that position because that'd be a very arrogant thing to do. Whatever, it's fine. Adam, thanks for calling. I hope you call sometime again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Be radical.
I'm sorry. All right.
No, take care.
I'm sorry that I came across it.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a few other people on the horn here. I wanted to give that guy just as much time as we could to say a thing. But man, but we've got two other theists on the line, and so I want to go through them. Are you cool just jumping right into the next one?
Let's do it. I got nothing, nowhere else to be.
Right, we got until 4:00. Hopefully these guys won't be another whole 30 minutes, but we'll see what happens. Coming up here, we got Jack, pronouns are he, him, says that the burden of proof is not only on theists, and a pure reliance on scientific evidence is not viable. Jack, you're on the line. How are you doing?
Good. Josh, or excuse me, Forrest, I believe I know you, but the other guy, what's your name? Is Paul? Is that correct?
Paul. Yep, Paul. Perfect.
Oh, well, very nice to meet you, Paul. I've called in once or twice before, but I haven't spoken to either of you before. So yeah, this is it's not like a continuation of anything, but it's sort of something which is a position of mine that I kind of evolved after speaking with Matt and Jimmy a couple weeks ago. And it's not really important. The important thing is just in regards to like dismissal of supernatural claims. And I don't want to pigeonhole either of you if these, aren't your positions. It just seems to be a common refrain. So if at the end of this you say, hey, that's, that has nothing to do with my own basis in skepticism or atheism, feel free to stop me. Sure. I just wanted to start off with basically the idea that in order for any claim to be dismissed, there has to be an implicit framework for that claim to be verified or dismissed. Like as an example, if there was, say, a piece of chicken in front of three guys, and they were all they were trying to figure out if it was cooked or not, and the one guy said he wanted to put his hand on the chicken to see if it was warm to indicate if it had been heated. Another guy said, I want to cut into it, see if it was pink on the inside. A third guy said, I wanted to use a meat thermometer to see if it was hot all the way to the core. There would be an implicit, need to make a argument for why each of these things can be used to verify if the chicken is cooked or not. And so what I meant by my first point is that, when we talk about, dismissal of supernatural claims, there needs to be an argument for why the axis along which we dismiss them is legitimate. And that's what I meant by the burden of proof is not only on theists. Does that make sense at all, or
not?
Can you tell us at all what you mean by dismiss? So do you acknowledge that there's a difference between unproven and dismissed?
Yes. If I need to be more specific, I'm happy to be. Like as an example, like if someone were to say like, X happened, I saw an elephant, the framework by which you either believe them or do not believe them. So yeah, if fail to believe is a better example or a better kind of phrase, I'm happy to use that.
Okay. So I'm unclear what you're trying to say.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, in order to believe or fail to believe something, there's generally there has to be a case to be made on why we ought believe this claim or why we ought not believe this claim. And that general axis needs to be demonstrated that it's viable and sound, basically. Does this make sense? I hope I'm not being too good.
I don't understand the relation. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I just did. Like you started out with a thing about chicken, and you gave 3 examples of how you could probably demonstrate that the chicken was cooked. Those are 3 different ways to prove a thing. You ought to believe it if you can prove it true. What are you getting at here with like dismissing the claim and or not believing it, even though you have a reason to believe it?
Well, the example I gave with the chicken was somewhat specific because, like in the example of the chicken, there's varying levels of viability to each of these tests, right? Like a chicken could be warm on the outside and not be cooked all the way.
Right. That's
It could
why
be
we
pink.
talk about accuracy and precision when we talk about scientific experimentation. Something needs to be accurate and precise because those are different measures, different metrics. Right. I get that.
Sure. And
so you want you would want to use the meat thermometer test because it's the most accurate and most precise test, right? So touching the chicken would be a bad test, but it's better test than no test. That's why we say every scientific model is wrong, but some of them are useful. So like, yeah, I get that. Where are you going with it to say that like reliance on scientific evidence is not viable and the burden of proof is not only on you? Like, where does this relate to what you called into?
Yeah. So the way this relates is that in regards to these various tests, there are times and examples where we can't always use scientific evidence, not because there's no theoretical scientific evidence, just because none exist at the moment or can be produced at the moment. The big example that I came away thinking about over the last couple of weeks is like novel experiences. You know what I mean? Like say if like a person, from Europe in the Middle Ages was to see a Nile crocodile for the first time or an elephant or something. Assuming there was some level of science, and science was limited at the time, obviously, but say they were from Western Europe, some more developed part of Italy, what have you, and they had some base scientific evidence, they still could be in like contact with a novel experience and not have scientific evidence to verify, its validity. And so my general point that I'm trying to get at and how to relate this to theism is that the failing of like relying on scientific evidence seems to me that it doesn't really have a model for novel experiences that just haven't been measured heretofore. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
So here's the thing.
Okay, well.
So let's say someone said I think you're trying to describe a situation where someone sees a crocodile and they've never seen one before, right? Is that what you're basically trying to say? Is your example?
Well, and it's critically, there's been no record of a crocodile that's reached.
Sure.
Okay,
no
awesome.
Metric or
measure.
A new thing happens. Yeah.
So a new thing happened. So he runs back to the village and he tells his buddy, I saw this creature that I'm describing it to you, and it's a log with teeth, and you don't get it. Oh, that's amazing. Whatever. They could all walk back to the village. They could all walk back there, and they could see footprints theoretically, or maybe the creature's still there, or maybe there is something that has been eaten in a unique way that is unique to like. There's lots of hypothetical things that could corroborate like the story.
Absolutely.
What's getting me the most is like you're saying, well, we don't have a scientific way of like handling a unique situation. How do you think we've learned anything about anything? Everything was a new, unique discovery at one point or another. There was a time, indeed, when somebody saw a crocodile for the first time with no prior understanding of what that was. And you know what we did? We did the shit that Paul recommended. We all went and saw it. We wrote down notes about it. We cut one open. We found more things like it. We put them together on a tree. Like we learned what the thing was because we saw the thing. The first step of the scientific the scientific method is observation. You see something novel, you make an observation, and I wonder what that's all about. And then you figure it out from there. Like, of course, there's a method for figuring out novel experiences. What are you talking about?
Well, I can be more specific if you like. I promise you, it's not something I
love
haven't
it if
thought
you would
about.
be as specific as possible, because this is like the third time now we've just said nothing.
Okay, I apologize. Take in the example of the crocodile, like you were saying. Yes, it's true. People could go back and view the crocodile and possibly find it. But if the crocodile was gone, they wouldn't be able to find it. And most critically, what I'm trying to get at is for the individual guy who first sees the crocodile, he does not have anything but his own observations. Observation is part of the scientific method, but it's not conclusionary of it. If that was the case, then anyone who observed anything supernatural would have scientific evidence of it. Observation is not enough.
Okay.
As, I've heard on the show.
So you are talking about Humean whether testimony ever can be valid evidence for a unique experience. You're talking about testimony now, right? Okay, cool. You could have opened with his testimony is a valid is. So here's the thing about testimony. There you have to. Testimony is always potentially mistaken, potentially correct, potentially a lie, right? Always. All testimony.
It's the worst kind of evidence.
So it's no. So the trouble is, if someone is giving testimony of something outside of our normal experience, you need to then the weight of that testimony needs to overcome the possibility that it is either a lie or mistaken. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So when you come to someone like myself and Forrest, and if you're not also a methodological naturalist, you can let me know. But I'm thinking we're both methodological naturalists as opposed to philosophical naturalists. We're not saying supernatural things could never happen, but so far we haven't seen any, so we are operating in the realm of that's our worldview. So when you want someone to testify, I am super familiar with people who have lied, and I'm super familiar with people who are mistaken, including myself. I have told people stories and found out later that I was wrong. So, when it comes to testimony about something supernatural, for someone like me, it's going to seem more reasonable that they're lying or mistaken. Right?
Yeah. Yes, I somewhat track with that. I mean, I would push back a little bit on the sense of like trust. If you could find someone who you trusted to a greater degree, you might have more reason to believe a more fantastical claim than another person.
My mom, whom I trust implicitly, tells me about aliens. So no, like it's anyway. But what I wanted to get to was you're not wrong in that that person who saw the crocodile has some justification for thinking that a crocodile is an animal. Or if you see a miracle, you have some justification for thinking that maybe miracles are possible. But that doesn't, unfortunately, translate to other people. That is not a good reason for someone else to think that there's a new animal that we've never seen, or that for someone else to think that there's a miracle. That is a problem with testimony. It's not testimony's fault, but it's just the reality of things. Like, so if the Holy Spirit is probably the best way I'm going to become a Christian again, right? Some experience that I'm convinced is from heaven, but that will never be evidence for Forrest. I could describe it all day long.
Nope.
And that would just suck though. Like God would have communicated with me, but it's just not transferable. And so I think you've called in to say, hey, we should just accept this thing that is not transferable as good. And it's like, well, it is good for an individual, maybe, but it doesn't work in a group. And I'm sorry, Forrest, I totally jumped over that one.
No, I appreciate you doing so, because like you go ahead and answer, Jack, and then I'll have a different question.
Okay. So I mean, I kind of came in with trying to get towards two conclusions, which is one, that personal observations, due to the fact of novel phenomenon, have to be, to some extent, at least more accepted than it seems like it's given credence often, specifically with talk about, hallucinations and that sort of stuff. And secondly, I mean, this is perhaps something we disagree on fundamentally, but I do think that there is levels of fantastical belief relative to the amount of trust you have in a person that speaks to that. That doesn't mean that if you don't trust a person and you hear them say, hey, I saw, aliens, or I saw, someone rise from the dead, that you believe them. It just means that there's different levels to which, you assign credibility to a story, regardless of the fact, or, well, in relation to the facts are out there, based off how trustworthy they seem to be. Does that make sense, at least in theory, on both those points?
Well, I mean, everyone can have their own epistemology, and if that's what you're choosing, I mean, we don't even choose what convinces us. So if that's something that's built into your epistemology to convince you, I can't say that that's wrong. That is something that convinces you. I think I would just argue now that. Go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
No, I've now lost track, so go for it.
Oh fuck! I'm an asshole. I was gonna say I was just gonna build off of what you were saying and say I think it's also has to do with the size of the claim. Like there's a lot of people. I teach science on my channel. There's a lot of people who would trust what I said about it if they're not familiar with the topic and I'm explaining it the best I can. They might take that as something. But if I'm explaining like population genetics and like how we can track evolutionary change. Like in my Light of Evolution series, which you should totally go watch. Like if I'm talking about that, that's one thing. And people can take that at face value because that's something that I've studied and I'm now passing on what I know about it. It would be like if I called my friend and said, hey, I ordered a pizza last night. They'd be like, why the fuck are you telling me? Okay, cool. That's a claim. They don't need evidence for it besides me telling them. If they really want to know, they might go crack open a biology book and fact check what I'm saying. They might look for the receipt of the pizza that I bought, whatever. It's a very different thing if I call up somebody or if I stand here on this show and say, hey, did you know that the moon is hollow and it's actually run by gophers? There's a whole colony of gophers in there, the whole society living in the moon, and it's a spaceship. The moon's a spaceship run by gophers. Now, all of a sudden, you're not going to be like, well, I trust Forrest. I mean, like, Forrest knows this stuff. Sure. He's a good guy. He wouldn't lie to me about this. If you think that, you're stupid. You should be asking for more evidence of that, no matter who's telling you that, right? So when you're telling me like, well, there's some things you don't really need proof for, and testimony kind of works sometimes, right? As Paul was saying, what I wanted to build off of that is just like, there's different levels of that. It's not just a blanket, I can trust some things sometimes. Like, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you're going to call up in the show and say that you prefer sushi over, barbecue, cool. I don't give half a fuck. I'll take your word for it. But if you're going to call on the show and say there's a reason to believe in a God, I need a lot more than your personal testimony. And I do need scientific evidence for that. Like that's not just something to just believe. That's a very big, expensive claim. Do you hear where we're coming from?
I do understand where you're coming from. I mean, the one thing I have just, and this to be clear is not like, to be clear, I do think some level of skepticism is absolutely appropriate for supernatural claims. I do not believe every supernatural claim that was ever made. That's not what I'm advocating. The problem seems to me to be that it seems as though oftentimes the likelihood of a supernatural event is de facto defined as zero. This is why I hear some atheists say, I don't know if it's either you, that they're not sure what would convince them if a God existed. And,
right.
If you're not sure what would exist to you, that, like, how could you define, obviously anything you see could be a hallucination. It could be, some event, but like at some point it seems to almost slip into the realm of solipsism. If like you see someone rise from the dead, say they're Jesus Christ, do something material and like leave. And then you're like, well, I could have just had a hallucination, especially if like several people see it with you or something like that. Do you at least follow that?
So a few responses. So if you skip that, I'm going to ignore that a few people saw it with you because now you're changing the variables. So we're talking about whether testimony will.
Apologies.
Something to convince me. So because that's external corroboration, right? So now we're talking about whether just you want to say, well, skeptics are over skeptical about this person. Because if you have a personal experience like that and you don't at least consider that it might have been a hallucination, then you are too credulous, right? Like I have people throw that in my face all the time. You would go you'd go get your brain checked out, or you'd go do something. I'm like, why would you not? Also, if you saw something like that, you need to be at least somewhat credulous. But I hope what you got built into what I said initially was there's three possibilities. Someone's accurately telling you what happened. Someone's inaccurately telling you what happened, and they're mistaken. Like it's true, they're lying, or they're mistaken. You're just, all you're trying to do is slide the levers on those three things. And what we're saying is, yeah, of course you slide the levers on those things. And Forrest is saying the same thing. What I'm saying, the claim has to overcome the likelihood that someone is lying or mistaken. And of course, knowing something about the person, if they're a habitual liar, well, all of a sudden, almost any claim, makes them think that they're lying. Or, so of course you build some of those other things in. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, if a claim still seems less likely than the person who's always telling the truth, or is so prescient and aware of their situation that they never mistake one thing for another, right? Like you have to I'm just saying that those are the levers that we have when it comes to testimony. And when you bring in other things that might corroborate, then you're not talking about testimony anymore. So
yeah, I get that, and I don't want to. Oh, you go ahead. Sorry.
I just think, and you seem to be telling us that we need to be more credulous. And
that's kind of why I think that's.
And I guess I'm. You are. You're basically saying, well, people might be telling the truth, and they might be, but that's why I'm like, well, I like corroboration. So testimony alone for me is never gonna. So my worldview is such that I have never experienced anything supernatural. I've never experienced anything that I believe was supernatural, even though at the time sometimes I did, and that I don't have sufficient evidence outside of myself to think that supernatural things exist. So when I'm presented with a supernatural claim, for me, lying or mistaken are gonna seem more probable without corroboration. That's just I'm stuck there. I have to live there. If God is real, that my standards were too high. We don't choose what convinces us, so I'm just stuck there.
Yeah, I mean, let me be clear. I came on the show not really knowing you guys' personal experience with this. My specific argument here is more for people who either have personal experience that they think can reasonably be attributed to supernatural, or two, have people who they seriously trust who claim to have experience with the supernatural. If neither of those things apply to you guys, it's not an argument for you. It's just common that I've heard from many atheists to say, I had this experience, but I'm not sure if it was a hallucination, or someone say like I have many family members who claim to have had this experience who I trust, who, never seem to lie to me. Again, I'm not trying to say like you should never consider hallucinations. You should never consider that. It just seems like the tautology of saying that, they're like the supernatural is supremely unlikely. I mean, I guess in that sense, I am asking you to be slightly more credulous, but I'm not saying if you haven't had experience or you don't have anyone you trust the testimony of who's had experience that you should believe. I'm basing mine purely on that hill, if that makes sense.
Let me try a different angle just for a second, because in the call screen here, you wrote that pure reliance on scientific evidence is not viable, and the burden of proof is not only on theists. That's what you put in there. So we've been talking a lot about like who you should believe and why and when and all these things, but just taking what you put in there and kind of running with it for a second. What's the alternative to scientific evidence that would make you believe a thing? It sounds like you're just saying you might just want to, or somebody you trust. And why do you think we have a burden of proof as atheists? Because it sounds like those two are kind of related, and it sounds like we've skipped over it. And we have I'll give it a couple more minutes before the end of the call.
Okay, I'm not trying to waste anyone's time.
No, of course not. I'm just telling you where the line is, because I'm not trying to tell you to hurry up.
I'm enjoying the conversation. Very good, Jack. You're doing a great job.
We have two other people that I want to get to, and we only have about an hour left is all.
Okay. Thanks, guys. So first off, in relation to the scientific method, the time when I would not believe the scientific method was, and that's why I gave the specific example of a crocodile for a medieval European. If I was in the woods, the swamps of Portugal, shall we say, and I saw a Nile crocodile for the first time, I would not wait for scientific evidence that thing that I'd never seen any quantifiable basis for existed.
You seeing the thing is one thing. What I'm saying is, if I tell you right now that I have a pet elephant in my backyard, you can say, I do believe you, that is true, or I don't believe you, that isn't true, or just I don't believe you. Yes, it's true. No, it's not true. Or I don't believe you. Those are three different claims. So if I go in my backyard and see an elephant, I have firsthand account of that happening. I have a reason to believe it. If I tell you, you can say, yes, I believe you. That requires evidence to do, or trust, I suppose. But it would be kind of a big claim for you to be trusting on. You can say, no, that's not true, which also requires evidence. You need to be able to prove that it's not true to say it isn't. Or you can just say, I don't believe you. Until you give me a reason to believe, I'm not going to accept it, which is what we're doing as atheists. You're saying there's a God. I'm not saying sure there isn't, because I've never proven that there isn't, which doesn't make any sense to do. I'm saying I don't believe you. Give me a reason to believe it. And you're saying, well, I have eyewitness. I saw it. And I'm saying, cool. That changes jack shit for me. So here we are again, like what you're saying. we can't rely on scientific evidence. What's the alternative? It seems like what you're giving us is just trust me. It's trust me, bro. I saw it. And that's not good enough for us, nor should it be good enough for you, especially for something as big as a God claim. It's not like the pizza example that I talked about. It's the big God claim. And then you're saying the burden of proof doesn't lie on it. How could I prove to you that I don't believe you? Where's the burden of proof for me when I say I don't have a reason to accept what you're saying right now? How on earth could you justify saying that I need to prove my disbelief of a thing? Like, it sounds like you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what atheism is or what, like, we're supposed to do to believe in something. And as Paul eloquently put a minute ago, it sounds like you're just asking us to be more gullible. And I don't understand how that's your position. And you've clarified it several times, and we've gotten nowhere. So just, can you please explain to me, like, how that makes sense? How are you squaring that circle in your head?
Okay, so to be clear, when I in the example I was talking about, there's two separate things I'm trying to talk about. Number one is obviously to trust your own eyes, to trust your own senses in the, experience of a novel phenomena.
Sure.
The secondary thing is trusting people you have reason to trust reporting a novel phenomena.
On some things. On small things, you trust somebody. And how much you trust them means that there's more reason to trust bigger things, but on a really big thing like a God claim, that's not something you just trust.
Well, that's why
there's no reason to trust
that. The specific. Well, that's why I used the specific example I did. In the same way that I would trust my own eyes.
This show isn't arguing whether or not crocodiles exist, dude. We're arguing whether or not God does. And you're calling in as a theist saying, well, if I saw a crocodile, you could probably believe me. And I'm saying, right, why do you believe in God? And I heard somebody that I trust talk about it isn't good enough.
Yeah, well, okay. I apologize if I have been unclear about any of this. I hope it's not, I hope I'm, anyway. In the example, okay, screw the example for we both know crocodiles exist now. What I was trying to get at was a novel phenomena. Another example you could use contemporarily is if someone saw an alien, or if I saw an alien, or if I saw any other, fantastic thing.
An extraordinary claim. An extraordinary claim, yes.
Sure. And that's why I would say that if I saw that in that moment, I would trust my senses. And critically, if
no one's arguing with that.
Okay. And no one, well, I thought there was argument about the trusted.
You're right, Paul. Sorry. Yes, we are allowing that to slide. I mean to say, you're right, Paul. If you called in and said, well, I saw God, then we would argue about that. We're moving past that. We're now at the part of you trying to convince us. Thank you for catching that, Paul. Well, I appreciate you.
Anyway, the point was, I called in without knowing, like, if you guys had anyone you trusted personally, who had any of this experience.
Not for a claim like that.
So, but here's the thing. I'm going to, the person I trust the most, who is myself.
I thought he was going to say me.
When I was nope. When I was you're like number 4. Shannon's up there. Yeah. Anyway. So, all right. So I myself had many experiences that I felt were supernatural while I was a theist. And when I was deconstructing my faith, one of the things I had to think about was, well, what about all those things I experienced? And because I shared them like they were miracles, I shared them like they were big deals. But then I looked back and I thought to myself, well, might I have been mistaken? I wasn't lying; those were my experiences. So I know that about myself. But was I mistaken? And as I analyzed those, I began to see, you know what? I might have been misattributing something. And so it is not entirely about trust. The person you trust the most in this world can be wrong about things and can misattribute even, and our senses are like unreliable to the sense that we can be 100% sure we saw a thing. And and it just wasn't accurate. Like our brains fill in all kinds of gaps, which Forrest can describe far better than I ever could. So no, I'm the person I trust the most, and I know that I've been wrong about things. So I can't put myself in a position where someone telling me about a thing that they're doing, maybe I could get so far as to say, well, you know what? You saw something that looked like an alien. I might be able to get too far with people I trust that I would grant that you saw something that you thought was an alien. But what I cannot jump along with is that you saw an alien.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's an important distinction for someone you trust and how.
I was just going to say,
I'll grant all day long that people had. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think like we said, or like you said at the beginning, we might have just come to a fundamental difference in epistemology. To me, if I can't trust my senses, I don't know how to reason past that. Even if in the example of fantastical claims, because I know there's been so many things humans have experienced that was novel and seemed fantastical, and then, was necessary for them to believe in before they had scientific evidence. That's why I kept coming back to the crocodile example, though I'm sure we're all tired of hearing it, so I won't go any further with that. But that's basically where I'm at. And, I mean, look, I would just ask one thing, Paul. Do you have a video on those experiences you were talking about and how you came to question them?
Probably. I think I have a video called "Why I'm Not a Christian," which probably goes into it a bit, and then there's probably random stuff on my live channel. But
okay.
You know what? If you want to talk about that next time I'm hosting a line show, feel free to call in, and I'm happy to. We've gone along for a long time, but I'm happy to lay out some of the things that I thought were supernatural experiences and what I attribute them to now. But yeah, we don't have time today, unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah, we got to move on.
Yeah,
Jack, thank you sincerely.
Thank you both. I appreciate it very much.
Take care. Yeah, thank you sincerely for calling in. It's frustrating where we feel like we get nowhere, but like at least we're taking the time to parse these things out. We've got two other theist callers on the line, and we've got two atheists as well. I hope we have time to get to them because I'm waiting for a very long time, but I don't know if we will, so we're going to do our best. We've got two other theist callers on the line, and theists always get priority on shows like this. And I'm going to start. There's one that's somewhat philosophical that I'm going to get to last, and then I've got this one here. It's Andrew, pronouns he, him, from Florida, who is a theist who has a position that it sounds like to me he has not thought about. Because this sounds like something that just popped into somebody's head. He says, why do theists need evidence for their subjective experience while the transgender community does not need evidence for their subjective experience? That's a double standard. Andrew, you're on the line. How are you doing today?
Hello, good. Yourself?
I'm real good. So
I was good until now. We'll see how it goes.
As I said a second ago, this sounds like something that like really hasn't been thought out. And I don't mean that in a super shitty way, but I mean it in a little bit of a shitty way. Because like that's like obviously, I don't know, just please explain your point and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Okay, so atheists deny people's religious experiences. They say, you don't have any evidence. Therefore, what you believe is wrong. But if religious people deny that...
Were you listening to that last call at all, by the way?
Yeah, you said there's no evidence, basically. So
no, I've never said that in my life. So
that's not at all what he said.
All I said was when someone gives me testimony, I have to evaluate, is it true? Are they lying or are they mistaken? So, but let's carry on with you. I didn't mean to interrupt your thought, but you're already strawmanned a little bit.
Give us the rest of your script.
Yeah, it just feels like a double. It seems to me that there's a double standard because you don't demand evidence from people saying, "I'm not the gender of my biological sex," and you say, "Yeah, you should believe that person, or else you're transphobic." But you deny religious people's inner experience, and so aren't you guys religious phobic or Catholicophobic or whatever? You're denying our existence as religious people.
Two questions, actually three questions. Number one, you do understand that sex and gender are different things, right? There's no gender of a sex, right?
Yes, I understand the explanation that they're two different things.
I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. I figured maybe you just misspoke there, but I didn't want to try to hammer you down on that. That's fine. Second thing is, can you choose whether or not you're religious? Can you change your religion at any time you want?
Your religion, yes, but religious beliefs.
So because you can't choose your gender, you either are trans or you're not trans. You're born that way. You understand how those aren't a super good analogy there?
You cannot choose not to believe in God. You barely have a choice in that.
Well, that's the thing.
If you, I don't believe in God anymore.
If you go out of your way to look for evidence and be convinced by different arguments, that's a choice you can make. You don't get to do that with being trans, right? You see how those are very, very different situations?
Yes, they are different situations.
Right.
But
okay. And then finally, the third thing that I have to ask you is, you understand that being trans is an actual real thing that's recognized by every major medical association, right? Every major medical association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, they understand what it is to be trans. That is an actual thing that happens in someone's brain. And that's a thing that we can actually study and diagnose. And like, there's actually a way that we make sure those people are taken care of. We can improve their mental and physical health outcomes just by taking care of them, right? Do you understand how that's very different than being religious, which is not a actual testable, quantifiable, scientific thing? That's just you believing in a religion.
Okay. Actually, yes. Yes, it is studied by neuroscience.
Religion is, or trans people are?
Religion. Religious experiences and why the brain believes in God is studied by science.
Hold on a second. Wait a second. I'm going to cut you. I'm just making sure we understand here that psychology and medicine are actual sciences, and trans people are taken care of and studied and understood by those sciences. And that's very different.
I agree with that.
Than when people call into this show and say, I saw Jesus in a piece of toast, and therefore I know he's real. That's a very different situation, right?
The second part of what you're saying, that framing right there that's the issue, because it's not just the specific claims, it's the religious experience itself, which is studied and quantified by neuroscience. I agree that transgenderism is a true expression of the human experience, and that they should be taken care of, and it is studied and it is proven by science. But what I'm saying is, we cannot have a double standard. Religion is also studied by science, and those are actual legitimate experiences.
Maybe I haven't been clear. Let me try again. Let me try again to be a little bit more clear. Being trans is a real thing, and so we see real evidence of it. We see real, actual, testable evidence of it. Being religious is a real thing, and we have tested people's religious experiences. Testing how they perceive their religion isn't the same thing as proving that a God is real. Anytime we test for a God, we don't come up with anything. Anytime we test for ghosts, we don't come up with anything. Anytime we test for anything supernatural, souls, you name it, we don't come up with anything. There's no evidence for those things besides somebody's subjective experience. So when we're talking about psychology, where the name of the game is somebody's subjective experience, whether we're talking about a disorder, something like, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, whatever, or if we're just talking about being trans, whatever we're talking about in psychology, like, we are relying on their subjective experience to help us understand what's going on in their brain. That's the best tool that we have to do that, right? Sure. That's one thing. When we're talking about religion, on the other hand, yeah, for sure, I agree with you. We've tested religious people, and we know what's happening a little bit with their brains when they have a religious experience. So the experience is a testable phenomenon. God is not. Angels are not. Demons are not. Ghosts are not. So comparing the two and saying, you should believe me when I say I believe in God because I had this experience, and is the same thing as saying you should believe me that I'm trans because I have this gender dysphoria, or whatever it may be, those are completely non-comparable things. Do you get how those are completely different How one is rooted in someone's subjective experience, yes, but it actually has facts to back up the phenomenon that's happening, and the other one is rooted in someone's subjective experience and has absolutely no backing to it whatsoever. You get the difference there?
Yes. I'm not saying that the claims have evidence, the specific religious claims that God exists, that there's evidence for that. But
right.
you're denying
Andrew, can I try this from a different way? Do you live in a world, Andrew, do you live in a world where atheists come up to you and say, you didn't experience a religious experience? Do people come up to you and say, you didn't actually even have that experience? Is that something that happens to you regularly, Andrew?
Yes.
Or
I'm called delusional. On this show, you're saying religious people are irrational for doing what they do. Okay. They shouldn't even be religious.
Not what he asked. That's
not what I asked. So that would be talking about your attribution of your experience, which is the open question, I think, on both issues, frankly. People feel like, but do the previous hosts that you've talked to said, no, you, Andrew, didn't even experience the thing that you're telling me you experienced? Is that something that,
no,
I'm sorry if that does, but okay.
No, not those specific words.
So awesome. So both on the religious realm and in the realm of trans people, I think that what we're all doing is saying, yes, those are your experiences, and we're trusting you based on your testimony. You kind of related to that last call. That's a level of a claim that you can make that I'm going to say, you know what, you, even though I don't understand it personally, you are describing that you experience of being trans. So I don't understand it. I don't have first-hand experience, but I'm trusting your testimony about that. And I'm also, just like Andrew, you told me about some religious experience. So I'm going to say, yeah, Andrew, you experienced that thing. So what you seem to be calling in to say, well, we should be trusting everyone, or why are we trusting the trans people's testimony versus the religious people's testimony? And I think what Forrest and I at least are doing is saying, we're accepting at face value all of the things that you're telling us you're experiencing. Now, can we talk about what is that attributed to? What can we attribute that to? How do we explain the experience you had? And you seem to be, Andrew, coming at us and saying, you are accepting the trans people's testimony, but not the religious people's testimony. And I'm just saying, on the people you're talking to today, we are accepting your experiential testimony both equally in the same way without hypocrisy. And where we did just differ is what we're going to do with that and how we explain it. Did I address in any way your original thing that you called in for, Andrew?
Yeah, you addressed it. We're overlooking the whole point of this show, I think. It's to eradicate a religion.
The whole point of this show is
imagine if I said I want to eradicate transgenderism, and I'm not doing that.
Here's the
difference. There are
difference.
Christians who do that, and I'm sorry for them, but I'm not doing that.
Here's the difference, Andrew, is that, number one, to Paul's point, we're not calling anybody. This is a call-in show, not a call-out show. We're not going door to door. We're not putting up posters. We're not, you are welcome to listen to this show or not. We're not evangelizing atheism. We believe, or at least I can speak for myself and say, I believe that religion is harmful. And so I am doing what I can to allow religious people to call me and talk to me and help them free themselves from religion. I think that's a morally good thing to do. And especially considering the fact that I don't believe in an afterlife, I am deliberately using the little bit of life that I have to try to do that, to help other people out. So I'm not being religious phobic or whatever. I'm not trying to, be shitty to anybody. I'm allowing people to call me and ask me questions in the hopes that maybe I can convince them of something, and then that's up to them. That's all. That's very different than what you're talking about. And I think the biggest disconnect that you have here, when you talk about subjective experience and believing people's experience, as Paul said, if somebody calls in and says I had a religious experience, we're going to take them at face value for it in terms that they experienced it. We just don't believe that their understanding of that experience was valid. It's like if I walk down my hallway, this is true. I have a hallway right behind this wall with my bedroom on the side. It's a narrow hallway. Every single day when I walk down that hallway, the bedroom door slams behind me because of the air pressure shift from me walking down the hall. Now, I can believe that's a ghost. That's the true experience. Is I heard the door slam. I can come and tell you that's a ghost slamming the door, and you can say it's probably not. The experience is the same. We're trying to debate what that experience means. And the difference here is that the experience of a trans person tells us about trans people. The experience of a trans person is explaining to us what it means to be trans. The experience of a religious person is attempting to explain the whole fucking universe. A religious person coming in and saying, hey, I had this crazy experience. Therefore, there's an amazing God that oversees the whole creation of everything and lives outside of space and time and cares about where you put your dick. And he said all this, like there's all of these massive implications come along with that. So it's very, very different. If Arden, who's hosting the show, by the way, say hello to Arden in the chat. Arden says, hey, I have XYZ experience and XYZ feeling, therefore I'm a woman. I'm going to be like, cool, because that's your experience telling me about your mind, and it's backed by science. There's scientific evidence to support what you're saying, front to back. I believe you. If, however, someone were to call me and say, I have XYZ experience, I have XYZ feelings, I have XYZ whatever, therefore I know that Jesus Christ rose from the dead 2,000 years ago and is watching us in heaven and has these rules about why gay people can't get married. There's no science backing that up on the other side. There's nothing supporting that. That's just them saying a thing and then jumping to a pseudoscientific conclusion. So they're not comparable. And for you to sit here and say, well, you believe trans people, why don't you believe religious people? Do you understand how that's a shitty and weird thing to do? Or do I need to explain it differently?
No, you've explained it very clearly.
Okay, so do you still hold the same belief that we are being religious phobic and that we need to believe religious people or that we have a double standard? Do you still believe any of that stuff?
I don't want to take away from what you said. You're saying my religious experience is not valid. Like, I went to church today. I had a religious experience. You're saying it's not valid.
Your experience is valid. The reason that you're attributing to your experience and the supernatural claims that you're justifying because of your experience, those are not valid. I agree with you that you had an experience. There, we can do tests on the neuroscience of that experience. We can tell you why when the music goes in a certain way and the lights come on and everyone stands up and raises their hand and all these things happen, there's a reason why that causes a certain euphoria in your brain. We can test that and we can calculate that. That happened for sure. But then to say, and therefore God, is not acceptable. That's a claim that's unscientific. That's something that isn't backed by the data that we have.
I agree with that. The saying, therefore that proves God. I agree with that.
Right.
But that's not
and
all.
That's very different than trans people.
People build their identities around their religion, and it's not affirmed. Their whole life is built around their religion. At least 10% of the population are seriously build their identity around their religion, and so shouldn't they be affirmed just as much as the transgender community? Not in that the claims are true or false, but that it is part of their identity, who they are. It's part of their culture. It's part of their life.
No, for all the reasons that I just explained. No.
But what you mean? Because I was literally a Mennonite, and I don't know if you know what that is. If you saw The Witness, but I was literally, no one didn't affirm that I was a Mennonite kid. No one was around denying that I held the beliefs that I did. Now there were probably, looking back in my life, there were probably lots of people who were snickering at me and saying, well, how can that person believe what they do and live the way they do? But no one attempted around walking up to me and saying, you're not a Mennonite kid. Like, that just wasn't a thing that happened. So I don't know how you're drawing these connections.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you permission. If you call in this show and you have said, I had a religious experience at church this morning, and if one of the hosts says to you, you didn't actually have that experience, then you can say,
sure.
then you can say Forrest and Paul says that you are being wrong. Like, I give you permission to use our names.
By all means. But like, that's the thing, dude. Like, being trans, like I said, it only talks to you. It only speaks to your experience, and it's backed by evidence. And more importantly, it isn't hurting anybody. It has no effect on anybody else. Being religious does affect other people. I believe it does hurt people, and it doesn't just speak to you. It's something that has to do with the whole damn universe. And that's something that we take seriously. That's a scientific claim now that we need to actually analyze. So, yes, I affirm that you had an experience. Yes, I affirm that you are religious. And furthermore, I think your religion is toxic and harmful and problematic. And I really, really hope that you get rid of it someday for the good of yourself and all of humanity. Those are all acceptable things to say that I would never say about trans people, because they simply don't apply. It's not even comparing apples to oranges. It's comparing apples to fucking cars. It's completely different things.
Okay, if you don't see the similarities, and I do agree with you that religion has many toxic and harmful elements. I do agree with that. But you're not. I don't think we're seeing the fact that people, it is part of their identity. They build their lives around it. It does benefit society in many other ways too. I don't think we're seeing that.
I would disagree entirely that it benefits society, but that's not the point. The point is who they build their identity, or what they build their identity around, doesn't matter. Trans people don't build their identity around being trans. They just are. I don't build my identity about being around being a man. I don't build my identity around having blue eyes. I don't build my identity around being white. I don't build my identity around being 6'2". Those are just facts about who I am. And if someone came up to me and told me that those things weren't true, they would be mistaken. It's the same thing with being trans. With religion, I can come up to you and say, hey, your God probably isn't real, and your belief in it is an issue for me. That's fine. That's different than me saying, hey, you aren't the gender that you think you are, or whatever. Like that's a very different kind of claim.
And I think we're way off what you originally called about. You seem to have called with a complaint that people weren't accepting your experiences. And I think, or that there's been some kind of inequity in how people's experiences are being accepted, or at least treated as being true and valid. And I think at least we've addressed that point for you. I think we're definitely going to walk away not agreeing on how you attribute either a trans person's experience or how you attribute a religious person's experience. And that's fine, but that doesn't seem to be the point of your call. So I think we got that one covered.
Yep.
You agree, Andrew?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have anything else to wrap us up with? Because we're going to... Sorry, go ahead, Paul. Did you have anything else to add?
I was going to ask the same question you just asked.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to wrap us up with? Do you think we missed anything significant?
Yeah. The one little phrase that people just are trans, but when it comes to religion, people are not just religious. I just want to just make one point about that. According to Dr. Andrew Newberg, who studies the neuroscience of religion, people are just religious. It's built into their brain. So they are just religious by their physiology.
What is your religion, Andrew? What is your religion?
Roman Catholic.
Were you born Roman Catholic, or did you learn about Roman Catholicism as a child?
I was born religious, and I chose Roman Catholicism through my cultural experience. But I was born. I
guarantee that whatever paper you're suggesting, I've never read whatever paper you're saying, but if I had to bet money, I would bet that he's talking about like a propensity for religiosity, not that you actually had a religion. You were not Roman Catholic when you were born. You may have had a greater propensity for religion. You may have been more likely to become religious because of whatever biological factors, the same way that some people are born more likely to become obese, more likely to become addicted, or with a higher risk of whatever. You may have been at a high risk of becoming religious at some point, but you were not born a Catholic. You learned about Catholicism, and because of whatever environmental or genetic or whatever factors, you were more likely to accept it. That would be one thing. But trans people are not born more likely to start thinking they're trans someday. They are born trans.
Okay.
Again,
So again,
I was
things.
religious. I was religious, and I'm not now. So which one was I born with?
Right, exactly. Anyway, Andrew, thank you so much for calling in. We're going to move on.
All right. Bye-bye, gentlemen.
Take care.
Thank you.
So as I said at the beginning of the call, if you just have a thought, think about it first. Take some time. Are these two things actually the same thing? Is it really harmful and rude and shitty for me to try to conflate these two things? Is there maybe a different reason to believe the thing that I'm believing at this moment? Maybe. Just take some time. Take literally 5 seconds and then call in. We've got, again, 2 theists on the line, and we've got 25 minutes left. So let's see how quickly we can get through this one. Not to say I'm going to rush, but just like, let's see if we can get another person in. We've got Kevin, who's been waiting for a very long time here, calling in from Florida. Apologists say that Hume is making a claim that testimony is insufficient and that say that is self-defeating. How do you guys respond to this? I have no idea what you're talking about. Kevin, will you please explain to me what you're... hi, by the way. Welcome to the line.
Hey,
what you're talking about.
how's it going?
It's literally what I was ranting about for like one of the calls. So we're good.
Yeah.
Carry on, Kev.
Okay, awesome. I wasn't listening to the video. I hope you guys are doing okay today. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I have a question about, so David Hume says that, and correct me if I'm wrong on how I say this, that witness testimony alone can never be enough evidence to establish a miracle. And is that correct so far? Right?
That is correct.
That is what you were
so far.
Yeah, that is what you were talking about a minute ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
And what I hear Christian apologists say to that is, he's just making a claim. That's just a claim. You're using a claim to refute a claim, so it's self-defeating. How do you guys deal with that or package that or whatever?
Well, because if that's where you end it, then then you haven't included David Hume's justification for that. So David Hume's justification for that is because it's always going to be likely, again, when we're talking purely about testimony, that it's always going to be more likely that the person is lying. And so you can establish what's the likelihood that a person X is lying, and maybe it's 5% of the time, maybe it's 90% of the time, who knows? But a miracle is theoretically going to be lower percentage than the fact that they may be lying, and then you have to also add on that they might be mistaken, right? So they may be, maybe I thought I saw a Bigfoot in the woods, but I really just saw someone in a furry jacket. But I went home, I didn't ever get closure on the furry jacket guy, so I went home thinking I saw Bigfoot, right? So if you add up the likelihood that someone's lying or mistaken, and we granted that that's going to vary based on the claim or based on the person, that's still for David Hume and for someone like me who's a methodological naturalist, that's always going to be a higher percentage than the miracle claim. And so I guess in a way they might say you're question begging because you're saying you're defining a miracle in a certain way that it doesn't happen very often or whatever. And that's where you need to actually then you might wrestle with that theist about. And I'm not sure, Kevin, if you're a theist or not, it doesn't really matter. You seem to be asking how I would respond. So anyway, the point is, then you need to say, well, most theists want to say that a miracle, I deal most often with the resurrection of Jesus, right? A thing that if it happened to only one person. So on a statistical basis, let's grant for the sake of the argument that Jesus absolutely raised from the dead. I don't know how many people have been alive. Let's say 20 billion people have been alive in the world. I don't know what the number is. So 1 out of 20 billion. Yeah. Oh, 1 out of 100 billion people have raised from the dead. So when you're talking to me and someone's walking to me and say, based on testimony alone, nothing else, Jesus rose from the dead, I am epistemologically very sound, even though it may have happened. It's very rational for me to say, well, there's more than a 1 in 100 billion chance they're lying. and there's more than a 1 in 100 billion chance that they've made a mistake. Right?
Yeah,
so that's what Hume is talking about. He's just saying you have to look at those just purely on a statistical basis. Now, if you want to be the kind of person that says, well, miracles happen every day and every birth is a miracle, and well, then we're not talking about miracle claims in the same sense and in the same way, and that's where you have to kind of get into it. And I'm not pitching this advocating for myself necessarily, but I'm sort of telling you what David Hume's intent was when he was trying to put forth that philosophy. And it's not just a claim that these things are more likely than miracles. He was defining miracle in a very specific way, and so in that very specific way, he was defining a miracle as a deity actively intervening in nature, right? And so, just statistically, that's supposed to be the exception rather than the rule. Like if you just say, well, photosynthesis is a miracle, well, whatever, we're just lost. So that's, I guess, how.
Yeah,
you got to get on the same page with the person about what a miracle is. Yep,
yeah, no, I get that. There's that. Do you just kind of look at it then like a word semantics game that apologists will use when they say, "Oh, that's just a
absolutely,
claim"?
Yeah, they're just saying, "Well, you're just making a claim, so I'm making a claim." Yeah, that's and obviously there's trouble with the word claim, because does claim mean merely the utterance of the phrase, or is that utterance combined with testimony? Like, yeah, there's all kinds of weird semantics to get into here. So I prefer not to get into semantic arguments. I just was kind of, for some reason, ranting about Hume, I guess because you asked about Hume. So
yeah, well, that's just because that's one of the frustrating things about this. I find when I'm like talking to both sides about this, and it's like really hard to kind of discern, okay, like I don't want to talk to people that like have an agenda. I want to talk to people that want to try to like get to reality or truth. Yeah. And I think what sucks about this is like someone like me who's like kind of floating in that middle. I talk to atheists, and I think people like you guys are like genuinely trying to get to truth. I don't think this is like a game you get. I don't look at this as a game you're playing, but like even if someone were to look at it like that, I think everyone of every religion and atheism would technically be doing that, but I don't look at that as like necessarily a bad thing, I guess. But it's just unfortunate because it's like, I think there's people like that on both sides and you're just going to have people that are going to be mistaken. And I don't know, it would be cool to just like have a world, I'm just kind of ranting now, where it's like, where we could just know for certainty that there's a God, or know for certainty that there isn't a God, and not this middle ground that it seems like we have,
It would be cool if we lived in a world where we could know for certain anything, but we're not in such a world. The best that we have is evidence. And so like that's kind of what we bring to the table, is we're looking for evidence to believe a thing. And there's, as we talked about with the last caller, one of the last callers, is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if Paul calls me up and tells me that he had pizza last night, that's not an extraordinary claim. It is a thing that, like, if I really cared, I could find evidence for, but it would be pretty ordinary evidence: a receipt, a box, a phone record of the call, it's something to a stool sample, whatever it may be, to show me that this is something that happened. But if Paul calls me up and says that there's aliens, or that God exists, or that there's gophers in the moon, or whatever other crazy big thing, you need more than just a little bit of evidence for that. And so, you're talking about that the idea that Hume making the claim that testimony is insufficient is in itself just a claim. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative is I believe anything that anybody says to me. Anybody can come along and sell me a bridge, and I'm going to say, well, I mean, they said it. Fuck, dude. I mean, what else can I do but believe it? And like that, that doesn't seem like a very safe way to live. And so, like, Hume, of course, he's making a claim. He's making a claim about the best way to go about being a logical thinking person. And I think it's a reasonable claim to make. And so you now get to decide, philosophy isn't science. Philosophy is just a suggestion of how to think about the world. All the philosophy bros hate me for saying that. But like, you now get to decide, do you agree with Hume or not? Even as a religious person, do you think that anybody who comes up to you and says whatever claim they have about whatever religion, because as I'm sure you've heard us say, you can sit here and talk to me about whatever your religion is all day long, and I guarantee there's
Yeah.
somebody else with another religion who can say the same exact shit for a different God that's incompatible with yours. So do you believe them too because they said the same shit? Or do you say, all right, I'm not going to take you at face value. Ordinary claims are ordinary evidence. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And here's religion, which offers not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary claims. Are you going to believe it? That's the gambit thrown down by this way of thinking. I'm not an expert on Hume by any means.
No, that's a
That's
that's
kind
a
of where
good
we're
way
at.
to put it. No, that's a good way to put it, though. You're saying, what's the alternative? And what a Christian apologist would say, well, the alternative would be just conveniently what I set the axioms to warrant belief in the proposition, right?
And they only
can
my
adjust those
belief.
axioms.
And it's
not
just my belief. It's not just my religion. It's my version. It's my interpretation of this version of this particular holy book that I use at my church, and only the parts that I've read. That's what's important. You know what I mean?
I had a Christian friend of mine earlier tell me I was oppressed by demons because I'm asking these questions. So I know the feeling of that.
And that is what we call in the business a thought stopper. If you can say that, then you no longer have to put in the hard work of actually thinking about what you're thinking about. And so, like, yeah, that's what happens. It's cult thinking. It's cult behavior. Anyway, I think we're about. We've got only. I was going to say we've only got about 50 minutes left, and I want to take one more caller. But like, Paul, do you have anything else to add?
No, I was just the blanket advice. Any time you're having a conversation in almost any topic, the first establishing that you're talking about the same thing is probably the most important thing you can do, even though it kind of sucks and is boring and sounds definitional. I don't care what the topic is. If the two people are using the same word to mean different things, you're not going to get anywhere. So first figure out what a miracle is, and then figure out from there.
Right. That's why it always sounds like we're being dicks whenever people call in and we're like, what God do you mean? And shit like that. And they're like, well, you know what I'm talking about.
I get it. I totally understand. Anyways, you guys have a good one. Take care. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate you. Take care. OP calls back in sometimes so we can talk about his God beliefs as well. So with that, we've got one more theist call, and then I doubt we're going to have time for the two atheists who have been waiting for a very long time, and I'm very sorry, but we do always prioritize theist callers, and so like as long as we have them, that's what we're going with. We've got John, pronouns he, him, says that his religion is spiritual and not necessarily provable, but thinks you need to believe in yourself. I don't know what that last part means. John, hello. You're on the line. How are you doing?
Waiting for a very long time, and I'm very sorry.
I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean here.
I'm a spiritual atheist, or not atheist, sorry, spiritual theist. I believe that there are things out there that can't really be explained any other way. I mean, I've had personal experiences that are a little bit out of the ordinary. And with that, I mean, I'd like to believe that you guys are right. Like, I want to think that there isn't more out there than can be, like Occam's razor, you know what I mean? Where the simplest solution is often the most correct solution. But like I said, I still have personal experiences that can't be explained any other way. I've been watching you guys for a long time, and I just feel like if anybody was going to be able to talk me down from a more complicated belief than necessary, it would be you guys.
So it sounded like whenever we started the call, I could hear feedback in my own voice. So it sounded like you were listening to the last call. So like, do you think, as we talked about with Hume's proposition here, do you think that with your strange experiences that can't seem to be explained any other way, do you think that the laws of nature were suspended and that there's some crazy supernatural thing? Or do you think maybe you made a mistake and you're under a misapprehension about something?
I mean, it's more likely that there was some level of misunderstanding. I mean, we're human, and there's a reason why secondhand testimony isn't really admissible in court, because people can be wrong. They can see something incorrectly. You know, if you're going to expect any level of proof, you need to have actual evidence, which I don't have, and I don't believe any other person who believes in God or gods has. I think it's more of a personal, subjective feeling that you either decide to have or you don't. It's not something that you can say with absolute certainty, and it's not something you should force on other people. It should basically,
so,
I believe that
with
if
that
you
in
believe
mind,
something, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but like, just I need you to get here with me. With that in mind, with the understanding that your eyewitness testimony of these things isn't super reliable, with the knowledge that you do invent memories as time goes on, and things don't really work out in your head, and you can go look on YouTube like eyewitness tests where they'll have like a tour group that's unsuspecting people, and they'll have a car zip through and some crazy fucking thing happens, and then they'll ask everybody what just happened, and everybody gives a completely different story because that's how eyewitness shit works, right? With that in mind, should you be basing your view of reality on, I had a weird experience a couple of times and I don't have an explanation for it? Or should you just say, I don't know what the fuck happened here, and then move on? Because I have shit like that.
Well, I mean, I feel like at the same time, as long as you're willing to not base everything in your life around it, it should be, I don't want to say fine, but I don't think it's detrimental. You know what I mean?
Well,
You go ahead,
the
Paul.
trouble,
as long as you're not
the trouble
basing everything around it, and go ahead.
But here's the thing. If you have an epistemology where you are willing to say, I'm going to let in false things because they make me feel good. If that's the way you're going to start making decisions, that's just the decision-making process that is going to lead to harm, right? That's one way where religion across the board, everyone's like, well, what about religion A and religion B and religion C? And I think Forrest are on the same page, is that if you are making decisions based on wrong epistemology, that in itself is a harm. That is actually, unfortunately, also going to propagate outwards, because that's how you've decided to make decisions. So I'm a little bit concerned when you're saying, I'm willing to take false things on board because of a gap. And I guess I want to come to where I'm really curious as to what you said, it cannot be explained any other way. You said that a couple times. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how did you come to the conclusion that it cannot be explained another way? Or did you actually mean, I just don't know?
I'd be willing to say that it's probably a scenario where it's more of me not knowing than it is of something crazy happening. But I feel like that's where I differ from a lot of people, where I don't necessarily believe in God A or God B. I believe that all religions have a little bit of something correct. So it's not saying, oh, Christianity is the one true religion or Islam is the one true religion. I don't believe that, Muhammad may have been a person, Jesus may have been a person, but I feel like their claims to godhood or being a prophet or having the supernatural part of them.
We're all going to agree on those. Like, the organized religions that's just the point where we are agreeing. So let's focus on where we're disagreeing here, because that's more fun for the audience. So where we are disagreeing is that you are there's something you don't know, and it seems like perhaps you're uncomfortable with this notion that you don't know. And so am I hearing you saying that you're holding provisionally that you are putting a label of X or supernatural just on some realm of things that you don't know yet? And therefore you're saying, well, it's not harmful because I'm just labeling the sphere of things I don't know as X. Is that sound like am I accurately saying what you're doing?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I feel like I most closely associate with Hinduism. I believe that in that right, you can believe in more than one God, so every God is applicable. I feel like with the reincarnation aspect of it, it's less because like there's scientific papers done about like cyclic cosmic cosmology, and I believe that is more of the route to reincarnation, like saying instead of coming back in this lifetime, or in this universe, you would come back next universe, and it would be because there's no real way to disprove it. You can't say, well, we'll just wait till the next universe and see.
We're back to the first call. Do you have any evidence that there's a next universe?
There has been some papers done. I don't know exactly which one or who the author was, but there was somebody won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for physics, saying that the cyclic cosmology is more likely than not, because if we were to have that going on, black holes' lower limit mass would be close to 2.1 solar masses, and that's what we find out in the universe, is there aren't very many small black holes, and the ones that we do find are in the range that we would expect to see if...
Are you talking about Roger Penrose?
Very possibly.
Yeah, so I just did a quick Nobel Prize winner reincarnation, and literally people are just citing his article, and he's actually angry about it. He's just saying that the universe is cyclical, right? That there's probably been multiple big bangs, and that the universe has collapsed on itself. And so Roger Penrose is actually rather annoyed that people are saying that, well, this means that people come back and forth. He's just saying, maybe this universe that we're in has been around before. So that's just an example where, like, perhaps that was a thing you didn't know, and you could have learned, but you were comfortable just sort of giving it a label that you wanted to. Like, it feels like that's sort of your epistemology. Is that right?
I mean, yeah. I feel like the personal opinions of the person who comes up with the idea isn't necessarily like the end-all be-all.
But he literally wasn't talking about people. He wasn't talking about people.
It's not the personal opinion of him. It's that you are saying something that he's not saying. He said, hey, it looks a little bit like this could be a cyclical cycle. And you're saying, aha, reincarnation. And he's like, that's not at all what I said, even a little bit. And you're like, that's your personal opinion. What you said was reincarnation. And that's exact. Oh my God, dude. What's frustrating to me about this is that what you're literally saying in this call, or at least the way I'm hearing it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing over and over is, I have no explanation for this. Therefore, I have an explanation for this, and it's fucking magic. And that's what I can't get past that in my head, where you're like, I don't have an explanation for this event, but here's this thing that no scientist is saying, and that sounds a lot like Hinduism, so it must be that. And it's like, no, I don't. That's not a good reason to believe anything. And as Paul pointed out a little while ago, even if it seems innocuous to you at this moment, hopefully at this point you can see how that's bleeding over into a lot of other things in your life now and causing other issues to corrode. You're just wearing away the structural integrity of your framework for reality, and that's scary.
Well, I mean, I can understand where you're coming from on that. Like I said, I'm skeptical of my belief that, the universe is a certain way. Like I said, there's no way to prove or disprove it. What I feel is my personal situation is, every time something scientific, like there's a new paper that comes out that explains X, then I take that and I say, well, then that is true, and I can remove that portion of my theist point of view instead of saying, oh, God X or God Y did this, it's okay, now this portion makes sense and I can scientifically rationalize that, and then I can move on and say, well, what else is associated with that discovery or that finding, and apply it to my life. I feel like theology is a portion of my identity, or a portion of who, or the way that I look at the world, but I feel like science is a more important way of looking at things, a more rational way of looking at things.
Right, so maybe stick to that then.
You've heard of God of the gaps, right? You've heard that phrase.
All the questions. Yes, sir.
You've heard God of the gaps, right?
Yes.
So it seems like you just explained to us that everything in the don't know category that you're labeling theism for yourself. And that when something gets pulled away into we do know it now, you remove it from the theism bucket and put it somewhere else. So you're you're just advocating and professing God of the gaps as the way you make decisions.
I don't know if I make decisions based on my religious theology, though. How you make decisions?
But how you'd make decisions, at least about God. The way you make decisions about God is you have a bucket of I don't know, and that's God. And then the buckets of things we do know, that's not God. One thing that was very difficult for me leaving religion was being comfortable with I don't know. One great thing that religion did for me was give me certainty about things that I was not justified to have certainty in. And so when you give that up, when you start to live a life where it's like, wait, some things are uncertain, that's super uncomfortable. And that was a place I had to live. And I'm wondering if that is where you are living now. I don't mean to project myself onto you, so please don't. I'm wondering if you have still some inherent discomfort with I don't know.
Well, like I said when I was getting screened for the call, I genuinely feel like if anybody's going to be able to talk me down from this, it would be you guys. As I've been wanting to call this show for a while, but I specifically wanted to wait until Forrest was on because I feel like the way he argues for these kinds of things is very persuasive. Like I said, I've been watching you guys for a while, and I've heard other callers make some ridiculous claims, and I feel like I am also making a ridiculous claim, but
I feel that way too.
I don't know. I genuinely don't know, and it's something that I, like Paul said, am a little uncomfortable about, and I do exhibit some God of the gaps behavior there, but I don't know.
I feel like what you're doing is you're latching on to because I did similar things when I was like in my late teens. I called myself a mystic. I was very much atheist, but I was like, every religion has a little something, right? They're all beautiful flowers in the same garden. All the religions are. And, I understand there's an underlying energy to the universe and that E equals MC squared and that everything, if you really think about it, that's kind of like a God. It's this all permeating, powerful thing that it controls and makes up all the things around. That's kind of a creative force that you could really go. I mean, it's not like it's like actually like acting on a will of its own, but I mean, like there's not like the secret with like the law of attraction, but there is a reciprocal effect of our actions. So that's kind of like what prayer is, and I did all the same bullshit and jumped through all the same hoops, and then I started applying the exact same rules of logic that I do to literally everything else to that, and it fell apart instantly. And that was the last vestigial structure of my upbringing, as my family was pagan. I was raised to believe in ghosts and magic, and if you draw this particular kind of pentagram on the ground and burn these particular herbs, you'll have good luck for the week. And this fly is going to make me fucking gouge my own eyes out, dude. And like there's a fly buzzing about me as I'm going to kill somebody. That's how I was at the time. I believed in all this magical stuff, and then I started applying the same rules that I do to everything else to that, and it all fell apart. And I tried to hold on for the very last second to this idea that, like, well, it's like, the magic is just science we haven't discovered yet. And there's all this, maybe there's, you can't get away from the maybe it's this way. And you can't, just because we haven't proven something isn't there doesn't mean it. And then that was the last gasp of any kind of supernatural belief that I had. And again, I think if you were to face what you're talking about here, the same way you would face literally anything else ever, it wouldn't stand a chance. I think you're giving it a lot of like special privilege that you shouldn't. That's how I feel.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Like, I just, I feel like I just keep going back to the same argument, the God of the Gap situation, where it's me making what could be argued as poor decisions based on something that is not yet explained.
Right. Don't do that.
And
This is my advice to you, sir. Anyway, we're going a little bit over time, so we're going to end this one. But feel free to call back in another time if you want to talk about some more. But I think you already know what the problem is. I don't think you would have been able to call us and say, I have this issue and I don't think this makes any sense. If you didn't already know it didn't make any sense. And I think you're looking for an excuse to try to make it make sense. And I think there's a part of you that's hoping that I won't have an answer, or that Paul won't have an answer, or that we'll try to justify it in some way. And I think there's another part of you that's hoping that we'll tear it apart completely. But I think you already know what's going on. This fucking fly, dude. Did you see it get up in the camera? But like, I think you already know what the answer is, honestly.
Well, I appreciate your guys.
Think about it some more, man. Yeah, you keep thinking about it, dude.
Have a good day.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Later, John.
Before we wrap up, just a couple of quick things. I also want to make sure yes, that was all the things. First of all, the message was already deleted by I Got Cookies, but a little bit ago while we were in that call, somebody named Peter Sayers put in the chat, you wouldn't know about God to argue against if not for religion. God is the default position, not atheism. That's it. I won't say no more. You wouldn't know about Santa Claus if it wasn't for the Santa people. So there has to be a Santa for you not to believe in, right? Because it's a thing to argue about. So believing in Santa is the default position. Where the fuck did you get the presents without him, right? That's the default. And if you argue against Santa, there has to be a Santa for you to argue against. You wouldn't even know about Santa if it weren't for the Santa. What a fucking ridiculous thing to say. I also want to throw out there, just again, can't stress this enough. Just like with the guy calling about trans people, think about what you're saying before you say it. Apply it to something else and see if it makes the same amount of sense. And if it doesn't, maybe reconsider saying it. I've got also really quickly, because of that call that we took about, trans people versus religious people, I just want to let everybody know that we have a whole ass show on this network, on this channel, where you can talk to real trans people. We got some of them. We caught them. We put them in little boxes and we forced them to do this show. It's amazing. Real, actual live trans people on this show. It's called The Transatlantic. It's on at... You can... now voice over the time, because isn't it Thursdays? I don't know. It's on at some point.
Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Time.
Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, which is the best standard time. So tune into that if you want to ask actual trans folks about trans issues and trans beliefs and transgender ideology. Ask them about it, because we are two cis het white men sitting here talking about
it. Right? Yep.
And so that's kind of somewhat problematic. We didn't talk about gender affirming care, but we did talk about, medical associations. And so I just quickly want to, as I usually do, I just want to quickly read. This is a statement from the American Medical Association made by Jack Resnick, MD, who was the president of the American Medical Association at the time this was published, which was on August 16th, 2022. So this is a statement from the then president of the American Medical Association. Every major medical association recognizes the vital role of gender-affirming care in improving the physical health and mental well-being of transgender individuals. That's the statement from the best fucking doctors in the country. And then I've got here also position statement from the American Psychiatric Association, approved by the Board of Trustees, July 2020. And here it's a pretty, 2 solid paragraphs of explaining, what gender affirming care is. It talks about puberty blockers. It talks about all sorts of things, but then they have some really just succinct bullet points here at the bottom. The American Psychiatric Association supports access to affirming and supportive treatment for trans and gender diverse youth and their families, including appropriate mental health services and, when indicated, puberty suppression and medical transition support, and opposes all legislation and other government attempts to limit access to these services for trans and gender diverse youth, or to sanction or criminalize the actions of physicians and other clinicians who provide them. So again, the best fucking doctors in the country are on the side of trans people. And like, I know, like I said, we weren't talking about gender affirming care, but I feel like they wouldn't have put out those statements if they didn't believe that being trans was a real thing. They wouldn't be supporting it and affirming it if it wasn't supported by the science in the first place. That's just my little opinion there. But like, those are 2 documents that I just happened to have on hand, and I felt like it might be important to put them out there at the end, that there aren't any medical association saying we need to protect these poor religious people, these poor oppressed religious people who are out here being so hurt by all these mean atheists trying to tell them that their religion is. But to compare religion to being trans and to say that they both must be respected and protected because they're both ideas and experiences is a silly and harmful thing to do. And here's the actual statements of actual medical associations, the best in the world, explaining how these things actually work and how they're actually supported. So call into the Transatlantic, talk to actual trans people, and listen to actual doctors and scientists if you want to learn about actual medicine and science. That's as an official representative of this company, that is my position. I don't know if it's the line's position, but I'm pretty sure it is. With that, it's been a hell of a show. Paul, do you have anything else to wrap up with before we proceed to close?
No, other than that, this was fun, and I thank you all the theist calls who I know that it takes a little bit to put yourself out there and to put your ideas on display and up against other challenges. So I want to say I appreciate everyone calling in and the bravery that took, and hopefully some points were made. Hopefully, and Forrest, it's always fun to be with you. So
always fun to be with you as well, good sir. Where can people find you, by the way? Where can people go to watch your content?
Well, normally on YouTube, and I have 2 channels. I have Paulogia, Paulogia, and Paulogia Live. So one place I'm a cartoon, and one place I'm live. So that's where you can find me.
That's versatile. I like that. You can find me also on them internets. Go to valkailabs.com and you'll find all my links to all my places, but check me out on YouTube mainly. YouTube is the best way to support me. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube machine. It's free and it helps me immensely. And check out my the recent videos, except for the Laugh You Lose one, because it's the worst video I've ever released. But like, check out all the rest of them. I think you'll like them. With that, it's time for us to wrap up. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for calling in. Thanks so much for being here. Make sure to smash that like button. Have an awesome rest of your day and never stop learning. Bye-bye. Oh, fuck, we're still here. I keep forgetting that we're still here whenever I say goodbye. I just have to stand here like an asshole. I didn't just wave at the camera.
Yeah, you can. I think you can. You can get out a book, read your notes, whatever you want.
Yeah, I just sit here and just act like I'm writing something like a news anchor.